It is a little after 3 in the morning on March 13th, 1964. A young woman named Kitty Genovese is walking the last few steps to her apartment in Queens, New York, when a man steps out of the dark and stabs her. She screams. She cries out that she has been stabbed, that she is dying. Lights come on in the building across the street. Windows slide open. People look down at her in the glow of the street lamp. And then, one by one, the lights go dark again. The story that ran in the newspapers 2 weeks later said that 38 respectable, law-abiding citizens watched her die and did nothing. That story was mostly false, but it gave birth to one of the most disturbing discoveries in the history of psychology, a flaw that appears to be wired into decent, ordinary, well-meaning people. It is called the bystander effect. And once you understand how it actually works, you will start to see it everywhere, including in the mirror. In the weeks after the murder, two young social psychologists met at a dinner party in New York and could not stop circling back to it. Their names were John Darley, who taught at New York University, and Bib Latané, who taught at Columbia. Everyone around them had the same comfortable explanation. The witnesses were cold. The city had made people callous. 38 human beings had simply stopped caring about one another. Darley and Latané did not believe it. They suspected the truth was stranger and far more unsettling than apathy. What if the people at those windows were not monsters at all? What if they were entirely ordinary, and it was the situation itself, the simple presence of other watchers that had frozen them in place? So in 1968, the two men did something the newspapers never could. Instead of judging the witnesses from a distance, they built experiments that could manufacture the very same paralysis on demand. In a laboratory, using people who were by every measure perfectly normal. And it worked almost every time. They began by inviting college students to take part in what the students believed was a discussion about the personal problems of university life. Each student was placed alone in a small room and told they would speak with the others over an intercom, one person at a time, so that no one would feel embarrassed talking face to face. But there were no others. There were only recordings. And partway through the conversation, one of those recorded voices began to break down. He mentioned that he was prone to seizures. His speech started to slur. He began to choke, gasping that he needed help, that he was going to die, and then he fell silent. Here's what Darley and Latané found. When a student believed he was the only person who could hear the emergency, 85% of them left the room to find help before the seizure was even over. But when a student believed that 4 other people were also listening through their intercoms, that number collapsed. Only 31% moved in time. The rest stayed where they were. They did not laugh, and they were not bored. Many of them trembled. They sweated. They dug their fingernails into their own palms and still did not stand up. When the experiment ended and the door finally opened, these students did not ask whether they had passed some test. They asked, with real fear in their voices, whether the boy was all right. This is the center of everything. The mechanism is called diffusion of responsibility. When you are the only witness to an emergency, the entire weight of it lands on you alone and you act. When you are one of many, that same weight is divided, split into pieces so small that no single person feels enough of it to move. The crowd does not share the burden of helping. The crowd dissolves it. Then they made it stranger. In another study, Latané and Darley sat people down to fill out a questionnaire and quietly began pumping smoke into the room through a vent in the wall. When a person sat there alone, 75% of them got up and reported it. But when they sat with 2 calm strangers who had been secretly instructed to do nothing, only 10% said a word. The rest stayed in their chairs. They squinted through the haze. They waved the smoke away from their faces. Some of them stood and leaned toward the window for air and then sat back down and kept writing, in a room steadily filling with smoke because no one else appeared to be worried. Each person was reading the blank expressions of the others as proof that there was nothing to fear, and the others were doing the exact same thing. This is called pluralistic ignorance, a room full of people, every one of them privately uneasy, all of them performing calm for one another until the performance itself becomes a danger. And it did not stay confined to strangers in rooms. When Latané and a colleague named Judith Rodin staged the sound of a woman in the next room falling and crying out that she was hurt, 70% of the people who were waiting alone went to help her. With a single passive stranger seated beside them, that number dropped to 7%. 7. The presence of one indifferent human being was enough to switch off an impulse as old as our species. In time, Darley and Latané mapped out exactly why this happens. They argued that helping is not a single reflex but a chain of decisions, and that a person has to pass through every link before they will ever move. First, you have to notice that something is happening. Then you have to interpret it as a genuine emergency, rather than a private quarrel or a harmless mistake. Then you have to decide that the responsibility to act belongs to you. Then you have to work out what to do, and only then can you finally do it. The presence of other people jams that chain at nearly every link. The crowd makes you doubt that anything is truly wrong. It quietly persuades you that the responsibility belongs to someone else. It makes you afraid of looking foolish if you are the one who overreacts and there was nothing there. A lone bystander has to clear that chain alone, and usually does. A bystander inside a crowd watches the chain break, link by link, and mistakes the breaking for common sense. There is one more cruelty buried in the numbers. Darley and Latané found that the larger the group, the slower help arrives, even on the rare occasions when it comes at all. In a real emergency, where a handful of seconds is the line between surviving and not, that delay is not a detail. It is the entire story. And they discovered something that should haunt anyone who has ever assumed the worst about a bystander. The people who failed to act were not at peace. They sat there scanning the room, glancing at the door, waiting for a signal. They were trapped in a private agony, wanting to move and unable to grant themselves permission, because some part of them was still waiting for someone else to go first. Now, go back to that night in Queens. For half a century, the lesson everyone drew from Kitty Genovese was that human beings are apathetic, that modern life had hollowed us out, that 38 neighbors had calmly watched a woman be murdered and felt nothing at all. But here is what careful researchers established decades later. The number 38 was almost certainly invented. Most of those neighbors never witnessed the attack. They heard a scream in the night and assumed it was a lover's argument or a drunken brawl. Several of them did call out into the dark. The police were, in fact, contacted, and a woman named Sophia Farrar ran down from her apartment, found Kitty bleeding in the hallway, and held her in her arms as she died. Kitty Genovese did not die alone and ignored. The famous story was a myth, but the discovery it accidentally triggered is not. The real horror was never that those people were cold. It is the opposite. They were ordinary, and ordinary turned out to be enough. You have done this. Not in an alley and not with a knife, but you have done this. The group message where something is clearly wrong and you watch the little dots appear and vanish, waiting for someone else to respond first. The email thread where an obvious problem is sitting in plain sight and you quietly assume that someone more senior already has it handled. The person slumped against the wall of the train platform that 100 commuters step around, each of them certain that somebody closer, somebody better equipped, somebody else will stop. The car broken down on the shoulder of a busy motorway, watched by thousands of drivers an hour, every one of them assuming the next will be the one to pull over. You were not cold in those moments, you were not cruel. You were simply one of many, and the arithmetic of the crowd did to you precisely what it did to those students sitting in their booths. You felt the full weight of it. You divided it into nothing, and you stayed in your seat. So this is what the experiments leave behind, the thing that settles in and stays. We tell ourselves we are safest surrounded by people, that with so many eyes upon us, someone will surely come if we fall. The science says the reverse is true. The more people who watch you go down, the longer you will lie there, and the less likely it becomes that any single one of them will move. You are not protected by the crowd. You are hidden inside it. Your best hope was never 100 witnesses. It was one person who understands that no one else is coming.